I can still smell it. That's the thing nobody tells you about grief. It has a scent. Mine smells like rosemary and garlic, like my mother's roasted chicken, like the last meal my family ever ate together while I was stuck in traffic, cursing at red lights, completely unaware that every second of delay was another second of life I was being granted. They found me sitting on the front porch at 9:47 p.m., still holding my phone, still staring at the 17 missed calls from a number I didn't recognize. The detective, Anderson, I think his name was. He kept asking me the same question. Why were you late? As if being late was a crime, as if being late wasn't the only reason I was alive to answer his questions. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That's what trauma does. It scrambles time, makes everything happen at once and never at all. Let me start at the beginning, back when I still believed that the worst thing that could happen that day was missing my mother's Sunday dinner. My mother had exactly one rule that governed our family with the force of natural law. Sunday dinner at 6 o'clock, not 6:05, not 6:15, 6 o'clock sharp, everyone in their seats, phones away, ready to pretend for 2 hours that we were the kind of family you see in commercials. We weren't, of course. No family is. But my mother, Patricia Chen, was a woman who believed that if you performed normalcy with enough conviction, it would eventually become real. So every Sunday, without fail, she would spend the entire day cooking enough food to feed 12 people, even though there were only 6 of us. There was my father, David, 62 years old, recently retired from the accounting firm where he'd worked for 37 years. He had the kind of quiet presence that people often mistook for wisdom, but was really just exhaustion. He loved my mother in that steady, unremarkable way that looks boring from the outside, but is actually the closest thing to magic that exists in this world. Then there was my older brother, Marcus, 34, married to Jennifer for 8 years, and already looking like a man who'd signed a contract he couldn't quite remember agreeing to. He was a corporate lawyer, the kind who wore expensive suits and cheap cologne, who'd learned to laugh at his boss's jokes even when they weren't funny. Especially when they weren't funny. Jennifer was there too, of course, blonde, perfectly maintained, with a smile that never quite reached her eyes, and a psychology degree she'd never used for anything except analyzing why everyone else's life choices were questionable. She taught spin classes on weekends and called it finding her passion. And then there was my younger sister, Emma, 23, fresh out of college, working at a nonprofit, and dating a musician named Tyler, who my father pretended didn't exist and my mother pretended to like. Emma was the only one of us who still believed in things, justice, love, the inherent goodness of people. We all found it adorable and slightly embarrassing, the way you might feel about a puppy that hasn't learned the world bites back. Tyler was there too that night, invited by Emma, despite my mother's tight-lipped disapproval. He played bass in a band called Midnight Frequency, which my father had once described as sounds that would make better sense as a fire alarm. And then there was me, Sarah, 29 years old, perpetually single, working as a graphic designer for a marketing firm that treated creativity like a spreadsheet problem. I was the middle child, which meant I was neither the golden boy nor the baby princess. I was the buffer, the mediator, the one everyone forgot to ask about until they needed something designed or a referee for their arguments. That Sunday, October 15th, the last Sunday they would ever see, I was late. It started with a client email at 4:37 p.m. I was already dressed, keys in hand, ready to drive the 40 minutes to my parents' house in the suburbs. But then my phone buzzed, and I made the mistake every modern person makes. I looked. Need revisions on the Morrison campaign by Monday morning. Critical changes attached. I stared at the email, feeling that familiar tension between responsibility and resentment. It was Sunday. It was already late afternoon. This could wait, but could it? That's the trap of modern work. The constant fear that if you're not available, you're expendable. So I told myself I'd just take a quick look, 20 minutes tops. I'd still make it on time, maybe even a few minutes early. I sat back down at my laptop. The revisions were, of course, not quick. The client had decided, at 4:30 on a Sunday afternoon, that the entire color scheme needed to change. Blue, to green. No, teal. Actually, more of an aquamarine. Could I also change the font and maybe adjust the spacing? And while I was at it, could I create 3 alternate versions so they could see the options? I texted my mom at 5:43 p.m. Running a bit late. Client emergency. Be there by 6:30. So sorry. 3 dots appeared immediately, then disappeared. No response. That should have been my first clue that something was wrong. My mother always responded to text, usually with some variation of hurry up or dinner won't wait. Radio silence from Patricia Chen was like a solar eclipse, notable because of its rarity. But I was too focused on color codes and kerning to notice the absence of her reply. By 6:15, I was finally done. I saved the files, sent them off, grabbed my purse and the bottle of wine I'd bought for dinner, and rushed out the door. Traffic on the 405 was its usual nightmare, a parking lot dressed up as a freeway. I sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel, watching the clock tick past 6:30, then 6:45, then 7 noughts. At 7:23 p.m., I called my mom. It went straight to voicemail. That was odd. My mother's phone was always on, always within reach. She claimed it was because of emergencies, but really it was because she was addicted to Candy Crush and neighborhood Facebook drama. I called my dad. Same thing, straight to voicemail. A small seed of worry planted itself in my stomach, but I watered it with rationality. Maybe they were all just really mad at me for being late. Maybe they'd made a pact to ignore my calls. Maybe my mom had instituted some new no phones at dinner rule and was actually enforcing it. I called Marcus, voicemail, Emma, voicemail. Even Jennifer, who was practically grafted to her phone, didn't answer. The worry was growing now, spreading roots through my chest. But I told myself I was being ridiculous. What was the alternative? That something had happened to all 6 of them at once? That was impossible. That was the kind of thing that happened to other people, in news stories you scrolled past while waiting in line at the coffee shop. I finally pulled off the freeway at 8:04 p.m., drove through the familiar streets of my childhood neighborhood, past the park where Marcus had broken his arm falling off the monkey bars, past the convenience store where Emma had stolen a candy bar on a dare when she was 12, past the intersection where I'd had my first fender bender at 16. Everything looked normal. The streetlights were coming on. Someone was walking their dog. A teenager was practicing skateboard tricks in a driveway. The world was aggressively, insultingly normal. I pulled into my parents' driveway at 8:34 p.m., 2 hours and 34 minutes late for dinner. The first thing I noticed was that all the cars were there. My dad's silver Toyota, Marcus's black BMW, Emma's beat-up Honda with the Bernie Sanders bumper sticker she refused to remove. Even Tyler's motorcycle was parked on the street. Everyone was here. So why hadn't anyone answered their phones? I got out of my car, the bottle of wine still clutched in my hand like a hostage. The front porch light was on, casting that warm yellow glow that my mother insisted made the house look welcoming. The living room lights were on too. I could see their shadows through the curtains. I walked up to the front door and reached for the handle. It was unlocked. "Hello?" I called out, pushing the door open. "I'm so sorry I'm late. Traffic was..." The smell hit me first. Dinner. The food was still warm. I could smell the rosemary chicken, the garlic mashed potatoes, the yeast from my mother's fresh-baked rolls. Everything smelled exactly right, which made everything feel exactly wrong. "Mom? Dad?" Silence. I walked through the foyer, past the family photos that lined the walls, our whole history captured in frames. There I was at 7, missing my front teeth. Marcus at his college graduation, Emma at prom. My parents' wedding photo, both of them impossibly young. The dining room was just ahead. I could see the edge of the table, the corner of my mother's best tablecloth, the cream-colored one with the embroidered flowers that she only used for special occasions or when she was trying to prove a point. I stepped into the doorway, and then I saw them. They were all still sitting at the table. That's what I remember most clearly, even now. They were sitting in their usual seats, as if dinner was still happening, as if they were just pausing between courses, waiting for dessert. My father at the head of the table, his reading glasses still perched on his nose. My mother to his right, her napkin still folded in her lap. Marcus and Jennifer across from each other, their hands almost touching on the table. Emma at the far end, her chair slightly pushed back. Tyler next to her, his arm draped over the back of her chair. They looked peaceful. That's the horrible thing. They looked like they'd simply fallen asleep, like this was some weird family meditation exercise that I'd interrupted. But I knew. I knew from the absolute stillness of them, from the way my father's hand was frozen mid-reach toward his water glass, from the way my mother's mouth was slightly open, caught in the middle of a word she'd never finish. I knew from the silence, not the peaceful quiet of sleep, but the terrible silence of stopped hearts and finished breaths. I don't remember dropping the wine bottle. I don't remember screaming, though the neighbors later told police that I did, that I screamed loud enough to wake half the block. I don't remember calling 911, but I must have, because they arrived 14 minutes later, their sirens cutting through the suburban quiet like a knife through silk. What I do remember is standing in that doorway, frozen, staring at 6 people I loved more than anything in the world, understanding with perfect clarity that I was looking at them for the last time, and I remember the thought that would haunt me for months afterward. If I had been on time, I would be sitting there too. The first responders arrived at 8:51 p.m. I was still standing in the doorway when they pushed past me, their equipment clattering, their voices sharp with professional urgency that I knew, even in my shock, was performative. They knew what I knew. These weren't patients to be saved. They were bodies to be processed. A female paramedic, young, with kind eyes that had probably seen too much, led me outside. "Ma'am, I need you to sit down. Can you sit down for me?" I sat on the porch steps, the same steps where I'd learned to tie my shoes, where Emma had kissed her first boyfriend, where my parents had watched the neighborhood kids hunt for Easter eggs every spring. "What happened?" I asked. My voice sounded strange, like it was coming from underwater. "We're going to figure that out," she said, which wasn't an answer at all. More vehicles arrived. Police cars, their lights painting the neighborhood in alternating blue and red. An ambulance, though there was no one to transport. A black van that I later learned belonged to the medical examiner. The neighbors started coming, out of their houses, standing on their lawns in their Sunday evening clothes, their faces shocked and hungry, in that way people get when tragedy happens, close enough to feel real, but far enough not to hurt them personally. Mrs. Patterson from next door was crying, her hand pressed to her mouth. Mr. Kim across the street had his arm around his teenage son, holding him back as if whatever was in my parents' house might be contagious. Detective Anderson arrived at 9:17 p.m. I know the exact time because I kept checking my phone, as if time was still something that mattered, as if I might somehow rewind it and show up at 6 o'clock, walk into a house full of living people. Anderson was in his 50s, with the kind of weathered face that suggested he'd seen every variation of human horror and had stopped being surprised by it. He sat down next to me on the steps. "I'm Detective James Anderson. I'm very sorry for your loss." The words were automatic, professional. He'd said them hundreds of times before. They meant nothing. "What happened to them?" I asked. "That's what we're going to determine. Can you tell me when you last spoke to any of them?" This afternoon, around 5:43, I texted my mom that I'd be late. "And did she respond?" "No, that's unusual for her. She always responds." He wrote something in his notebook. "What time did you arrive?" 8:34. "You're certain?" I checked the time when I pulled in. I was feeling guilty about being so late. "Why were you late?" That question again. Why was I late? As if being late was the crime, as if I needed to justify my survival. Work. A client needed revisions on a project. Can anyone verify that? I stared at him. You think I had something to do with this? I don't think anything yet. I'm just gathering information." But I understood. I was the only survivor, the only family member who wasn't dead. Statistically, that made me suspicious. I'd watched enough true crime shows to know how this looked. "My laptop," I said. "The files I was working on are time-stamped. My client sent the email at 4:37. I sent the final files at 6:14, and my car has GPS. You can check where I was." He nodded, wrote more notes. "I'll need the client's contact information, and I'll need to take a formal statement from you at the station." "What happened to them?" I asked again. He looked at me for a long moment as if deciding how much to tell me. "We're not sure yet, but there's no signs of violence, no forced entry. The house is undisturbed except for the dining room. They're just sitting there. Yes. All of them at once. Yes. That's not possible. That doesn't just happen." "No," he agreed. "It doesn't." The news crews arrived by 10:30 p.m., their satellite trucks clogging the street, their reporters doing stand-ups in front of my parents' house, their carefully concerned faces lit by camera lights. 6 people dead in apparent mass casualty event in quiet suburban neighborhood. Authorities investigating mysterious deaths of entire family. Sole survivor questioned as police search for answers. I watched from inside Detective Anderson's car, where he'd put me after the reporters started shouting questions. "Miss Chen, did you kill your family? Miss Chen, why didn't you eat dinner with them?" The toxicology reports came back 3 days later. Carbon monoxide. The house had filled with it while they ate, seeping up from the basement where the old furnace, the one my dad had been meaning to replace for 2 years, had developed a crack in the heat exchanger. The gas was odorless, colorless, invisible. They never knew it was killing them. They just got tired. And then they fell asleep. And then they died. All 6 of them, sitting at the dinner table, slowly suffocating while I sat in traffic and cursed the delay. The detective explained it to me in his office, his voice gentle in that way people use when they're delivering news that will reshape your entire understanding of the universe. The levels were extremely high. They wouldn't have felt any pain. They probably didn't even know anything was wrong. It would have been like falling asleep. I wanted to ask if that was supposed to make me feel better. I wanted to ask if he thought peaceful death somehow canceled out the horror of it. I wanted to ask why, if the universe was going to kill my entire family in one night, it couldn't have at least made them suffer so I could believe they'd fought to stay alive. But I didn't ask any of that. I just sat there, staring at the photos spread across his desk. Crime scene photos. My family, frozen in time, eternal dinner guests at a meal that never ended. "If you had been on time," Anderson said, "you'd be dead too." I knew that. I'd known it from the moment I saw them, but hearing him say it out loud made it real in a new way. "The carbon monoxide detector," I said. "There was one in the kitchen. Why didn't it go off?" "Battery was dead. Looks like it had been dead for months." Of course it had. That was so typical of my father, putting things off, assuming there was always more time to fix them. The furnace could wait, the detector could wait, everything could wait because we're all young and immortal, and death is something that happens to other people until it isn't, until it's you, sitting at Sunday dinner, getting sleepier and sleepier. And none of you realize you're dying because dying isn't supposed to feel like this, gentle and warm and easy. "There will be lawsuits," Anderson said, "against the furnace company, the home inspector, maybe the previous owners. Your family's estate will be substantial." I laughed. It came out harsh and ugly. "Great. Blood money. I'm sure that'll help." He had the grace to look uncomfortable. We buried them on October 23rd, 8 days after they died. 6 caskets, 6 graves, an entire family tree cut down in one night. The funeral home offered us a family discount. That's what they called it. A discount, as if buying in bulk for corpses was the same as shopping at Costco. 6 funerals for the price of 5. What a bargain. I picked out the caskets alone. There was no one else left to do it. My mother's sister, Aunt Linda, had flown in from Seattle, but she spent most of her time crying in the bathroom, emerging with red-rimmed eyes and tissues clutched in her fists like white flags of surrender. My father's brother, Uncle Ray, had driven up from San Diego, but he was in his 70s and kept forgetting why he was there, asking where David was if he'd be joining us soon. So it was me, 29-year-old Sarah Chen, picking out 6 caskets like I was choosing paint colors for a living room. The funeral director, a thin man named Westbrook, who smelled like formaldehyde and spoke in hushed tones, even though we were the only ones there, guided me through the showroom with the practiced ease of a car salesman. "This is our premium line," he said, gesturing to a casket that looked like it cost more than my first car. Solid mahogany with a velvet interior, very dignified. Dignified. As if my family's dignity depended on the thread count of their eternal pillows. "For your mother," he continued. "Many daughters choose something with a more elegant design. This one has hand-carved roses on the lid." I stared at the roses. My mother had loved roses. She'd had a whole garden of them in the backyard. Red ones, pink ones, yellow ones that she'd babied through every winter. She'd named them all. The red ones were her passionate ladies. The pink ones were her sweet girls. The yellow ones were her sunshine babies. They'd probably die now. No one left to water them. "I'll take it," I said. We went through the rest. A simple oak for my father. He would have hated anything too flashy. Matching caskets for Marcus and Jennifer because even in death, they apparently needed to coordinate. Something modern and minimal for Emma because she'd always rejected traditional conventions. And for Tyler, the boyfriend who'd been dating my sister for only 7 months and who died eating dinner with a family who barely knew him. Something that looked both respectful and not too expensive, because I felt guilty spending a fortune on someone who was essentially a stranger, even though he died the same death as everyone else. The service was held at St. Catherine's, the church my mother had attended every Sunday after dinner. I hadn't been inside in years, not since I was 16, and told my parents I didn't believe in God anymore, which had resulted in 3 weeks of my mother's disappointed silence and my father's awkward attempts to talk about spiritual journeys. Sitting in the front pew on that October morning, surrounded by 6 closed caskets draped in white flowers, I still didn't believe in God, but I found myself praying anyway, angry, desperate prayers that went something like, "If you're real, if you're listening, explain this to me. Tell me what the fuck kind of plan this was." The church was packed. 300 people, maybe more, all dressed in black, all wearing the same expression of shocked grief that had become the uniform of everyone who'd heard about what happened. Father Michael gave the eulogy. He talked about how my family had been pillars of the community and how they were together in heaven now, and how this was all part of God's mysterious plan. I wanted to stand up and scream. I wanted to tell everyone that there was no plan, no mystery, no divine purpose. There was just a broken furnace and bad luck and the cosmic joke that being late for dinner had saved my life. But I sat there silent while people who barely knew my family stood up and shared memories that sounded like they'd been copied from a greeting card. Patricia made the best pot roast. David was always willing to help. Marcus had such a bright future. Past tense. Everything about them was past tense now. Emma's friend Kayla spoke, sobbing through a story about how Emma had convinced her to adopt a rescue dog, how Emma believed in second chances, how Emma made everyone around her want to be better. Tyler's bandmates played a song they'd written for him, something raw and angry that was the only honest moment in the entire service. They didn't pretend to understand. They didn't talk about God's plan. They just screamed into the void and let it scream back. When it was over, when we'd listened to the prayers and the hymns and the hollow condolences, we drove to the cemetery in a processional that stretched for blocks. 6 hearses, one after another, like a parade of death. They'd bought 4 plots years ago, back when they thought the only people who'd need them were my parents, and maybe eventually Marcus and Jennifer. They'd never imagined needing 6. They'd never imagined their youngest daughter, their rebel daughter who was supposed to live forever, buried next to Tyler, the musician they'd barely tolerated. I stood at the edge of the graves, 6 holes in the ground, 6 descents into darkness, and watched as they lowered the caskets, one by one. My mother, my father, my brother, his wife, my sister, her boyfriend, my entire family disappearing into the earth. People approached me afterward, one by one, saying the things people say at funerals. "I'm so sorry for your loss. They're in a better place. At least they didn't suffer. Time heals all wounds." I nodded. I thanked them. I accepted their casseroles and their hugs and their phone numbers scrawled on business cards with offers of anything you need, just call. I knew I'd never call. By 4 p.m., everyone had left except Aunt Linda, who stood next to me in the October sunlight, both of us staring at 6 mounds of fresh dirt decorated with flowers that would be dead by morning. "You should come stay with me," she said. "In Seattle. You shouldn't be alone." "I'll be fine." "Sarah," I said, "I'll be fine." She left the next morning, crying in my driveway, making me promise to call her every day, a promise we both knew I wouldn't keep. I went back to my parents' house on November 3rd, 3 weeks after they died. I'd been avoiding it. Detective Anderson had kept it sealed for the investigation, and even after they'd released it, even after they'd ruled the deaths accidental and closed the case, I couldn't bring myself to go inside. But there were things that needed to be done. The estate lawyers needed documents. The insurance companies needed proof. The bank needed death certificates. Death is bureaucratic. Nobody tells you that. You think grief is crying and sadness and wearing black, but mostly it's paperwork and phone calls and explaining to strangers that yes, they're all dead. "No, I don't have a copy of that form. Could you please send it again?" I parked in the driveway, the same driveway I'd pulled into that night, and sat in my car for 20 minutes, staring at the house. It looked exactly the same. The front porch light was still there, waiting to welcome people who would never come home. The lawn was getting long, my father's weekly mowing schedule interrupted permanently. The roses in my mother's garden were beginning to wilt, their petals dropping onto the grass like small deaths. I finally forced myself out of the car and walked to the front door. The police had changed the locks, given me new keys. My hands shook as I tried to fit the key into the lock, missing twice before finally getting it in. The smell hit me first. Not death. The bodies had been removed weeks ago. The house had been professionally cleaned. Another service I'd had to research and hire. Another check I'd had to write. The death cleaning company. That's what they called themselves, right there in their advertising. "We clean up after death." No, what I smelled was absence. The house smelled like a place where people used to live but didn't anymore. It smelled like stale air and dust and the particular loneliness of objects waiting for someone to use them again. I walked through the foyer, past the family photos that now felt like archaeological evidence of an extinct civilization. The living room was pristine. The cleaning company had been thorough. The magazines on the coffee table were still there, perfectly fanned out. My father's reading glasses sat on the arm of his chair, waiting for eyes that would never see through them again. I couldn't go into the dining room. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Instead, I went upstairs to my old bedroom, the one I'd slept in from age 7 until I moved out at 22. My mother had turned it into a guest room, but she'd kept some of my things, my high school yearbooks, my swimming trophies, a box of letters from my first boyfriend, the one who broke my heart when I was 17 and who I'd thought I'd never recover from. Funny how the worst pain of your life keeps getting upgraded. I sat on the bed, the same bed where I'd cried over that boyfriend, where I'd studied for my SATs, where I'd told my best friend that I was moving to LA and felt like I was abandoning my family. If only. My phone buzzed. Another text from someone I barely knew, checking in, offering hollow support. I'd gotten hundreds of them in the past 3 weeks. The text came in waves, desperate at first, then gradually tapering off as people got bored of my tragedy and moved on to their own lives. I scrolled through my messages. There were the unread texts from my family, the ones from that Sunday that I'd never answered because I thought I'd just see them in person. Mom, 3:42 p.m. Don't forget to bring wine. Your father drank the last bottle. Emma, 4:15 p.m. Tyler's so nervous about dinner, LOL. Dad's going to grill him about career prospects, isn't he? Marcus, 5:30 p.m. Running late. Jennifer needed to stop for dessert. Save me a seat. And then, after I'd texted that I'd be late. Emma, 5:58 p.m. Mom's annoyed, but she'll get over it. Hurry though, she made your favorite. That was the last text any of them ever sent. I'd read it 100 times, 1,000 times. She made your favorite. Rosemary chicken, my mother's specialty, the meal she made whenever she wanted to show love in the only way she knew how, through food, through the ritual of gathering around a table. The meal that killed them. I should delete these messages. Everyone told me I should. It's not healthy to keep reading them, Aunt Linda had said. You need to let go. But I couldn't. These texts were proof that they'd existed, that they'd been thinking about me even in their last hours. Without them, it would be too easy to believe this had all been a nightmare, that I'd wake up and they'd still be alive, still annoyed at me for being late, still waiting for me to show up. I went back downstairs. I couldn't avoid it forever. The dining room, the cleaning company had been here too. The table was bare, no tablecloth, no dishes, no half-eaten meals. They'd removed everything, scrubbed every surface. But I could still see them sitting there, ghost images burned into my retinas. My father reaching for his water glass. My mother with her mouth open, mid-sentence. Marcus and Jennifer, their hands almost touching. Emma leaning back in her chair. Tyler with his arm draped behind her. Frozen. Forever. I'd asked Detective Anderson what they'd been talking about, if there had been any way to know what their last words were. He'd looked at me with something like pity and said, "Does it matter? Yes, it mattered." I needed to know if they'd been happy, if they'd been laughing, if they'd been in the middle of one of my father's terrible dad jokes or one of my mother's nostalgic stories about when we were kids. I needed to know if they'd died in a moment of love or in a moment of the usual family. Tension. Marcus and my father arguing about politics, Jennifer making passive-aggressive comments about Emma's life choices, my mother stress-eating bread and pretending everything was fine. But I'd never know. Their last words were gone, evaporated with their final breaths. I opened the basement door. The stairs descended into darkness. I'd have to flip the light switch, walk down into the place where the death had originated. The furnace was still there, the cracked heat exchanger that had turned my childhood home into a gas chamber. The county had condemned it. There was a bright orange sticker on the unit warning that it was not to be used, that it was evidence in a closed investigation, that it represented a hazard. A hazard. That was one word for it. I stood at the top of the stairs, staring down into the basement where my father had stored his old golf clubs, where we'd done laundry for 30 years, where the Christmas decorations sat in labeled boxes waiting for a holiday that wouldn't come. And I thought, what if I just close the door? What if I sell this house, as is, furnace and all, and let someone else deal with it? What if I never come back here? But I couldn't do that. This was my inheritance, not just the house and the bank accounts and the life insurance policies, but the responsibility of deciding what to do with a place that was both a home and a crime scene, both a repository of happy memories and the location of the worst thing that had ever happened. I closed the basement door. I'd deal with it later. Or never. Grief had taught me that later was a flexible concept, that sometimes I'll do it later really meant I'll carry this weight until it crushes me. The therapist's name was Dr. Sarah Morrison, which seemed like a cosmic joke, sending me to talk to someone who shared my name as if I needed to literally dialogue with myself about my trauma. "Tell me about the guilt," she said during our third session. We were in her office in Santa Monica, a space decorated with the kind of aggressively calming aesthetic that therapists seem to love. Soft blue walls, plants everywhere, inspirational quotes about growth and healing. There was a Tibetan singing bowl on her desk that she claimed helped with grounding exercises. So far, it had just reminded me of the wind chimes my mother used to have on the back porch. "I don't feel guilty," I lied. Dr. Morrison, the other Dr. Morrison, the one who was alive and helping people instead of dead in the ground, gave me the look. The one therapist perfect in graduate school, the one that says, "I know you're lying, and I'm going to wait here in silence until you're uncomfortable enough to tell the truth." The silence stretched. I counted the seconds. 30, 40, 50. "Fine," I said. "I feel guilty." "About what specifically?" "About everything, about being late, about being alive, about the fact that I was cursing traffic while they were dying, about the fact that my last thought before I saw them was annoyance that my mom hadn't texted me back. Those are normal feelings for a survivor. Survivor's guilt. I know. I've Googled it. I've read all the articles. Why did I survive when others didn't? It's textbook. Knowing the name of something doesn't make it easier to feel. Doesn't make it any more logical either. She leaned forward, her hands clasped in her lap. Guilt isn't logical, Sarah. It's not supposed to be. So what am I supposed to do with it? Just feel it? Forever? You're supposed to understand that being late wasn't a choice you made to save yourself. You didn't know what was happening. You couldn't have known. But if I had been on time, you'd be dead. Exactly. And that's better. I didn't answer, because the terrible truth was that sometimes, in the dark hours of early morning when sleep wouldn't come and the ghosts were loudest, yes, it felt like that would have been better. At least I wouldn't be alone. At least I wouldn't be the one left behind to sort through the wreckage, to make decisions about caskets and estates and whether to keep or sell a house full of ghosts. At least I wouldn't have to carry the knowledge that being stuck in traffic, being annoyed at a client, being 40 minutes late to dinner, that these mundane frustrations had saved my life while my family suffocated on their roasted chicken and mashed potatoes. I keep thinking about alternate timelines, I told her, about all the tiny decisions that led to me being late. If I hadn't checked my email, if the client hadn't sent revisions, if I'd just ignored it and left on time, if there hadn't been traffic, if I'd taken surface streets instead of the freeway. You're trying to find the moment where you could have changed everything. Because there has to be one, right? There has to be some point where I could have made a different choice. And if you'd made that different choice, you'd be dead. Or maybe I would have noticed something was wrong. Maybe I would have opened a window. Maybe I would have smelled the gas. Carbon monoxide is odorless. Or noticed they were getting sleepy. Maybe I could have called 911 in time. Maybe. Or maybe you would have just died with them. I hated her for saying it. I hated her for being right. There's another version of the story, Dr. Morrison said, where you did arrive on time, where you walked into that house and sat down at that table and ate that meal. And in that version, there's no one left to feel guilty. No one left to mourn. Your entire family line just ends. 6 bodies instead of you sitting here alive, able to remember them. Lucky me. I'm not saying you're lucky. I'm saying you're here, and being here means something. What? What does it mean? I don't know yet. That's what we're trying to figure out. The dream started in November and never stopped. Always the same one with variations. I'm driving to my parents' house. Sometimes I'm on time, sometimes I'm late, sometimes I'm early. But I always arrive, and I always walk through that front door, and I always head toward the dining room. And they're always there, sitting at the table. But they're not dead. Not yet. In some versions of the dream, they're still eating, still alive, still talking and laughing. I try to scream at them to get out, to run, but no sound comes out of my mouth. I try to open the windows, but they won't budge. I try to drag them out of their chairs, but they can't see me, can't hear me, can't feel me pulling on their arms. I'm a ghost in my own dream, watching them die in slow motion. In other versions, I arrive just as they're falling asleep. My father's head is drooping. My mother's words are slurring. Marcus is blinking slowly, fighting to stay awake. Emma is laughing at something Tyler said, but the laugh turns into a yawn, and then she's resting her head on the table just for a second, just to close her eyes for a moment. And I can't stop it. I can't change it. I can only watch. The worst version is the one where I sit down with them. I walk into the dining room, and they're all alive, and they're so happy to see me. You made it, my mother says, smiling, pulling out my chair. I was worried you wouldn't come. And I sit down. I know what's going to happen. I can feel it in the dream, that knowledge that this is wrong, that danger is here. But I sit down anyway because I miss them so much. Because I want just one more meal with them, even if it kills me. My mother serves me chicken. My father pours me wine. Marcus asks about work. Emma tells a joke. Jennifer compliments my hair. Tyler asks if I like music. We eat. We talk. We laugh. And then slowly we all get tired. I should probably head home soon, I say. But my words are thick. My tongue heavy. Just stay a little longer, my mother says, her eyes already closing. Just a few more minutes. And we all start to fall asleep. Right there at the table, our heads drooping, our breath slowing, our hearts stopping in unison. but right before I die, right at that final moment, I wake up, every time, gasping, sweating, my heart racing, my room dark and empty and wrong. And I lie there in the aftermath, in the 3 a.m. silence, and I wonder, would it be better if the dream let me die with them? Would it be better to never wake up? Dr. Morrison said the dreams were my mind's way of processing survivor's guilt, of trying to rewrite the story so I could be with them, so I wasn't left behind. Your subconscious is giving you what you think you want, she explained. The chance to die with them, to not be alone. Is that what I want? I think part of you does. The part that feels guilty for surviving, but you keep waking up. That means another part of you wants to live. I wasn't sure she was right about that. I think I woke up because that's what bodies do. They insist on living even when the mind is ready to give up. It's a design flaw in the human operating system. Thanksgiving was a particular kind of torture. Aunt Linda invited me to Seattle. You shouldn't be alone for the holidays, she said on the phone, her voice tinged with the forced cheerfulness people use when they're trying to pretend everything is normal. I'll be fine. Sarah, you can't just... I said I'll be fine. I wasn't fine, but I also couldn't imagine sitting at someone else's Thanksgiving table, pretending to be grateful, listening to other people's families laugh and argue and exist in that casual, beautiful way that living families do. So I stayed in my apartment in LA, ordered Chinese food, and watched Netflix until the holiday was over. Friends invited me to their gatherings, people I'd gone to college with, coworkers from the marketing firm. You're part of our family now, they said, which was a nice sentiment that only made me feel more alone because I already had a family. Past tense. On Thanksgiving night, I got drunk for the first time since the funeral. Not elegant, wine with dinner drunk. Full on, sitting on the kitchen floor, finishing a bottle of vodka drunk. I called my mother's cell phone, which I hadn't canceled because I couldn't bring myself to end that one last connection. It went straight to voicemail, like it had every time I'd called in the past 6 weeks. You have reached Patricia Chen. I can't come to the phone right now, but please leave a message and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Except she wouldn't. She'd never get back to me. But I left a message anyway. Hey Mom, it's me. It's Thanksgiving. I'm sure you're busy in heaven or wherever you are, cooking for like 1 million people because that's what you do. Did. Whatever. I laughed, and it came out wrong, harsh and broken. I miss you. I miss all of you. I'm sorry I was late. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry I'm here and you're not. A pause. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to do this. How do you do this? How do you just keep living when everyone you love is dead? I waited, as if she might answer, as if the rules of reality might bend just this once and let me hear her voice. The voicemail beeped. Time's up. Message recorded. I called my father's phone next, then Marcus's, then Emma's. I left messages for all of them, drunk confessions to ghosts, apologies to people who couldn't hear them. By midnight, I'd passed out on the bathroom floor, my phone clutched in my hand, 3 empty voicemails waiting in the digital void. I woke up at 5 a.m. with a headache that felt like divine punishment and a missed call from Aunt Linda, who'd apparently been worried enough to check on me 3 times during the night. I texted her, I'm fine, just tired. Happy Thanksgiving. She didn't believe me, but she stopped calling. Settling the estate took months. My parents had been reasonably wealthy, not rich, but comfortable. The house was paid off. They had retirement accounts, life insurance policies, savings. My father had been meticulous about finances, had planned for his and my mother's eventual death, had set up trusts and wills and all the legal mechanisms that turn death into distribution. But he'd planned for 2 deaths, not 6. He'd certainly never planned for his daughter to be the sole heir to everything. The lawyers walked me through it all. My parents' estate would be split between their 3 children, except 2 of those children were dead, so their portions would be divided among their heirs. Marcus and Jennifer had no kids. Emma had no kids. So everything came to me. The house, the savings, the retirement accounts, the life insurance, $4 million. That's what my family's death was worth in purely monetary terms. $4 million divided among 6 corpses equals 666 each, which felt like an appropriately demonic number, plus the lawsuits. The furnace manufacturer settled out of court for an undisclosed sum. The home inspector my parents had used when they bought the house settled for another chunk. The previous owner's estate, they died 3 years earlier, different causes, settled for a third. By the time everything was finalized, by the time all the lawyers had taken their fees and all the settlements had been processed, I was looking at somewhere around $7 million. Blood money, death money, guilt money. I sat in the estate lawyer's office, a man named Bernard Chen, no relation, who'd specialized in probate law for 30 years and who'd probably never seen a case quite like this, and stared at the paperwork. "You're a wealthy young woman now," he said, as if this was good news, as if I should be excited. "I'd rather have my family." "Of course, I didn't mean—" He cleared his throat. "The point is, you have options. You can invest this money, buy property, travel. You don't have to work if you don't want to." Options. I had options now. I could do anything, go anywhere, be anyone. All I had to do was trade 6 lives for the freedom. What a bargain. "What about my parents' house?" I asked. "That's up to you. You can sell it, rent it, move into it, whatever you'd like." I thought about moving into that house, sleeping in my old bedroom, eating meals in the dining room where my family had died, waking up every morning in a museum of grief. "I want to sell it." "Are you sure? It's a substantial asset and the market." "I want it gone, as soon as possible. I don't care about the price." He made a note. "I'll contact a realtor." The house sold 3 weeks later for more than asking price to a young couple who'd just had their first baby and thought the neighborhood was perfect for raising a family. I didn't tell them what had happened there. Legally, I didn't have to. California law only required disclosure of deaths on the property within the past 3 years, and it had only been 6 months. The law considered that close enough to still matter. But I signed the disclosure forms, watched the couple's faces change as they read about the 6 deaths, watched them look at each other with that silent communication that couples have. They bought it anyway. "Every house has a history," the wife said. "This one's history is sad, but that doesn't mean our story has to be." I envied her optimism. I envied her belief that you could move into a house where people had died and somehow make it happy again, fill it with new memories, drown out the ghosts with birthday parties and Christmas mornings. Maybe she was right. Maybe houses don't hold on to death. Maybe that's just a human thing. I gave them a discount anyway, $50,000 off the asking price, which they tried to refuse, but I insisted on. Guilt money, redistributed. The 1-year anniversary hit like a truck I didn't see coming. I thought I'd be prepared. I'd been counting down to it, dreading it, planning how I'd get through October 15th without completely falling apart. But when the day arrived, I realized there's no amount of preparation that makes you ready to commemorate the day your entire family died. I drove to the cemetery at sunrise, before anyone else would be there, before I'd have to see other mourners, tending other graves, performing their own rituals of grief. 6 headstones in a row, all matching gray granite with simple engravings. Patricia Chen, 1962, 2024. Beloved wife, mother. David Chen, 1962, 2024. Beloved husband, father. Marcus Chen, 2024. Beloved son, brother, husband. Jennifer Chen, 91, 2024. Beloved daughter, wife. Emma Chen, 2001, 2024. Beloved daughter, sister. Tyler Martinez, 99, 2024. Gone too soon. Tyler's parents had insisted on a separate service, had wanted him buried in their family plot, but Emma's will, such as it was, a document she'd written at 23, never expecting to need it, had specified she wanted to be buried next to my partner. My mother would have been horrified. In life, she'd barely tolerated Tyler. In death, he was her neighbor for eternity. I sat down on the grass between my parents' graves and my sister's grave, forming a human bridge between my past and my future. I'd brought flowers, not roses, I couldn't do roses, daisies, which Emma had loved, carnations, which were my mother's second favorite, baby's breath, which Jennifer had carried in her wedding bouquet. I arranged them on each grave, taking my time, making sure they were perfect, because what else could I do for them now except make sure their flowers were arranged just right? "It's been a year," I said out loud, feeling stupid, but doing it anyway, because Dr. Morrison had said talking to them might help, might give me some sense of closure. Closure. What a ridiculous concept. As if grief was a door you could just close when you were done with it. Seal it. Up. Move on. I'm still here. I'm still, I don't know, existing, I guess. Not really living. Just going through the motions. A breeze picked up, rustling the leaves of the oak tree that shaded their graves. I sold the house. I'm sorry if you're mad about that. But I couldn't keep it. I couldn't go back there. Silence. Just me talking to stone and grass and bones. I quit my job, the one I was working late for that night. Seemed kind of stupid to keep working for a company that literally cost me my family. Well, not cost. That's not fair. But you know what I mean. Did they? Could they hear me? Was there anything beyond these graves, or was I talking to myself? I don't know what I'm supposed to do now. Everyone keeps asking me what my plans are, like I'm supposed to have plans, like I'm supposed to know how to build a life when mine ended a year ago. I picked at the grass. Dr. Morrison says I'm making progress, that I'm processing the trauma, that the dreams are less frequent, that I'm learning to live with the guilt instead of drowning in it. She's probably right. She's a therapist. They're supposed to be right about this stuff. A family walked by, parents with 2 young kids, here to visit some other grave, some other loss. The kids were fighting over a toy car, their voices loud in the cemetery silence. The mother shushed them, reminded them where they were, what this place meant. The kids quieted down, but only for a moment. Because kids don't understand death. Not really. To them, cemeteries are just parks with stones instead of swings. I envied them. Emma would be 24 now. She'd probably be doing something amazing, changing the world, making me look bad like she always did. I smiled despite myself. Marcus would be trying to make partner at his firm. Jennifer would be, I don't know, teaching more spin classes, planning the next big renovation project. Dad would be retired, probably driving Mom crazy, getting in her way while she tried to garden. And Mom would be planning next Sunday's dinner, calling me to remind me not to be late. Again. The irony wasn't lost on me. The one time being late mattered. The one time it would have killed me to be on time, and that was the lesson the universe chose to teach me. Don't be late! Except when being late saves your life. I stayed until noon, until my legs were cramped from sitting, until I'd run out of things to say to 6 people who couldn't hear me. As I was leaving, I passed Tyler's grave one more time. "I'm sorry you died," I told him. "I'm sorry you were there. You seemed like a good guy. Emma really liked you." That should have been enough for the rest of us. The second year was somehow worse than the first. The first year there was at least novelty in the grief. People checked in, friends called, Aunt Linda flew down twice. There were milestones to get through, the first Christmas without them, the first birthday, the first anniversary. But the second year, people moved on. They stopped asking how I was doing. They stopped sending texts on holidays. They stopped treating me like someone who'd suffered a tragedy and started treating me like someone who should be over it by now. "It's been 2 years, someone said at a dinner party I'd made the mistake of attending. "You must be doing better now." Must I? Was there a timeline for grief? A schedule I was supposed to follow? Year 1, acute grief, crying, anger, denial. Year 2, acceptance, moving on, returning to normal. Year 3, fully healed, ready to date again, maybe even laugh at dinner parties. I wanted to tell this person that there was no better. There was only different. There was only learning to carry the weight without collapsing, learning to breathe around the pain, learning to exist in a world that contained this loss. But I didn't say that. I just smiled and said, "Yes, much better, thank you." Because that's what people wanted to hear. They wanted to believe that grief had an expiration date, that loss could be overcome, that time really did heal all wounds. Time didn't heal anything. Time just made you used to the bleeding. I traveled in the second year, used some of that blood money to see places I'd always wanted to visit. Paris, where I ate croissants alone and cried in front of the Eiffel Tower. Tokyo, where the crowds were so dense I could almost forget I was alone. Barcelona, where the architecture was beautiful and meaningless. I took photos, like travelers are supposed to. Selfies in front of famous landmarks, pictures of meals I ate in restaurants where I was the only one sitting at a table for one. I posted some of them online, maintaining the fiction that I was a person living a life, not a ghost going through the motions. Friends commented, "So jealous! Living your best life. You look so happy." I look like someone who'd learned to smile for cameras. That's not the same as happy. It happened in year 3, during a session that started like all the others. "How are you doing?" Dr. Morrison asked. "Fine." "Sarah." "Okay, not fine, never fine, but existing. Is that good enough?" "Tell me what you're thinking about." "The same thing I'm always thinking about. The fact that I should be dead. The fact that being late saved me. The fact that my entire family died while I sat in traffic. We've talked about this many times, intellectually, that being late wasn't your fault. Intellectually, sure, but there's this other part of me, this angry, irrational part that thinks I should have known, that thinks if I'd really loved them, I would have sensed something was wrong. I would have driven faster. I would have been there. To die with them. Yes." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Sarah, I want you to try something. Close your eyes." I did. "I want you to imagine that version of events, the one where you arrive on time, where you walk into that house at 6 o'clock. Picture it as clearly as you can." I didn't want to, but I did it anyway. I imagined pulling into the driveway at 5:58, grabbing the wine, walking up to the door, going inside. "You're there," Dr. Morrison said. "You can smell the food. You can hear their voices. They're all alive. What do you do?" I sit down, at the table, in my usual seat. And then, we eat. We talk. It's awkward because Tyler's there, and my parents are being weird about it. But it's also kind of nice. It's just dinner, Sunday dinner. And then you start to get tired. Yes. All of you. Yes. And what happens? We die, all of us, together. And then what? The question surprised me. What do you mean, then what? We're dead. That's the end. Is it? What happens to your family after that? I don't know, they're buried. People mourn them. Who mourns them? Aunt Linda, Uncle Ray, friends, co-workers. And who takes care of the estate? Who makes the funeral arrangements? Who decides what to do with the house, with their belongings, with all the things that have to be decided when someone dies? I stopped. Because I'd never thought about that part. In my fantasy of dying with them, the story always ended at the table. I'd never considered the aftermath, the mechanics of loss, the bureaucracy of death. Aunt Linda, I guess, or Uncle Ray. Your mother's sister who can barely hold it together at the best of times. Your father's brother who's in his 70s and has early dementia. Then, I don't know, Someone would have to. Yes, someone would have to. And it would be hard. It would be traumatic. It would be grief and paperwork and difficult decisions. All the things you've been doing for the past 3 years. She paused. So let me ask you this. If you had died that night, if you had been at that table, who would you want going through what you've gone through? Who would you want to carry this weight? I opened my eyes. No one. I wouldn't want anyone to have to do this. But someone would have to, because death doesn't just end with the dying. Someone always has to stay behind. Someone always has to carry on. And in this version of events, in the version where you survived, that someone is you. I felt something crack open in my chest. Not breaking, opening. Like a door I'd kept sealed was suddenly letting in light. You think you should have died with them, Dr. Morrison continued, but what you're really wishing for is that no one had to die at all. And since you can't have that, since you can't change what happened, you're stuck in this loop of guilt and what-ifs. But Sarah, someone had to survive, someone had to be left behind. And the fact that it was you wasn't a failure, it was just what happened. It doesn't feel like just what happened. It feels like I abandoned them. You didn't abandon them. You were late for dinner. Those are not the same thing. For the first time in 3 years, I felt something shift. Not healing. I wasn't ready to call it that. But maybe acceptance, the beginning of it anyway. So what do I do now? I asked. You live. You keep living. Not because you owe them anything, but because you're here. You survived. And survival, Sarah, is not a crime. I started small. I adopted a cat. Her name was Miso, a 3-year-old tabby I found at a shelter who had been returned twice by previous owners for being too independent. She was perfect. She didn't need me to be okay. She didn't ask how I was doing. She just existed in my apartment, claiming the sunniest spots, demanding food at precise intervals, completely indifferent to my emotional state. It was the best relationship I'd had in years. I started cooking again. Not Sunday dinners. I couldn't do that. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But small things. Pasta. Stir fry. The kind of meals you make for one person who's trying to remember that eating is part of living. I stopped calling my family's voicemails. Their cell phones had been disconnected anyway. The numbers reassigned to strangers who probably wondered why they sometimes got emotional drunk voicemails from someone named Sarah. I kept some of their belongings. Not everything. I wasn't ready to become a hoarder of grief. But small things. My mother's recipe book with her handwritten notes in the margins. My father's watch, which I wore sometimes, even though it was too big and didn't quite fit. Emma's favorite hoodie, which still smelled like her perfume if I pressed my face into it and breathed deep enough. Marcus's wedding ring, which Jennifer's parents had let me keep because they had no use for memories of a son-in-law who died alongside their daughter. I wore it on a chain around my neck, a reminder that I came from people, that I belonged to a family, even if that family only existed now in past tense. I went back to work. Not at the marketing firm. I'd burned that bridge spectacularly, quitting over email with a lengthy explanation of how they were complicit in my family's death by sending last-minute projects on Sunday afternoons. But I found freelance work, graphic design for small businesses, logo creation for startups, work I could do from home, on my own schedule, without anyone asking me to stay late or demanding revisions at 4:37 p.m. on a Sunday. I made new friends. Or rather, I let old friends back in. The ones who'd kept trying even when I pushed them away, who'd continued sending texts and invitations even when I never responded. We're having a game night, my friend Melissa said. Please come. You don't have to stay long. Just come. I went. It was awkward at first. I'd forgotten how to be around people, how to laugh at jokes, how to participate in conversations about normal things like TV shows and relationship drama. But slowly, over weeks and months, I remembered. Or maybe I learned. Maybe I'd never known how to do this, how to be a person, without the scaffolding of family to hold me up. I started dating, sort of. Terrible first dates with men from apps, sitting across from strangers and trying to decide how much to tell them. Do I mention that my entire family died? Is that first date conversation? Third date? Most relationships ended after I explained. They'd get this look, horror mixed with pity, and I'd know I'd lost them. I'd become the girl whose family died, and that was too heavy a story for someone who just wanted to Netflix and chill. But one guy stayed. His name was Nathan. He was a teacher, divorced, with a daughter he saw every other weekend. I told him about my family on our second date, expecting him to run. He didn't. That's awful, he said. I'm so sorry that happened to you. And then he asked if I wanted to order dessert. Just like that. My tragedy acknowledged, and then life continued. We ordered dessert. We talked about other things. He didn't treat me like I was broken. It didn't last. We dated for 4 months before realizing we were better as friends. But it was enough. Enough to show me that I could be more than my grief, that I could have experiences that weren't defined by loss. By year 5, I'd developed a routine. Every Sunday, I cooked dinner. By myself in my apartment with Misho watching from the counter. I set the table for 7. 6 place settings for my family, 1 for me. I cooked my mother's recipes. Rosemary chicken, garlic mashed potatoes, fresh baked rolls. And I ate alone, surrounded by empty chairs. having a conversation with ghosts. Emma would have turned 28 this year, I'd say out loud, spooning potatoes onto a plate no one would eat from. She'd probably be running some nonprofit by now, changing the world like she always talked about. Marcus, you'd be 43, probably a partner at the firm. Jennifer would be teaching Soul Cycle, calling it Soul Cycle, even though that's trademarked. Mom, your roses are doing well. I planted some at my apartment complex. The landlord wasn't thrilled, but he let me anyway. They're the yellow ones, your sunshine babies. Dad, I'm using your watch. It doesn't keep time very well. I think it needs a new battery, but I wear it anyway. It makes me feel like you're still here, checking the time, making sure I'm not late. Dr. Morrison asked if this was healthy, these Sunday dinners with the dead. Probably not, I admitted. But it's what I've got. It's what you've chosen, she corrected. There's a difference. Maybe she was right. Maybe this was my way of keeping them alive, of refusing to let go completely. Maybe it was pathological. Maybe it was beautiful. Maybe it was both. On the 5th anniversary of their deaths, I returned to the cemetery. 5 years, half a decade. Long enough that most people had forgotten it had happened. Long enough that when I mentioned it, I'd get blank looks, people trying to remember if they'd heard this story before. The graves look the same. Stone doesn't age the way people do. It just sits there, marking the place where bodies decompose, where energy transforms from life to earth. I'm doing okay, I told them. Most days, some days I'm not. But I'm here, I'm living, I'm trying to build a life that would make you proud, or at least a life that wouldn't make you too disappointed. The wind picked up, scattering leaves across the cemetery grass. I think about you every day. Not in the sad way, not always. Sometimes I think about something funny Marcus said once, or the way Emma used to dance when she thought no one was watching. Sometimes I remember Mom's laugh, the real one, not the polite one she used for strangers. Sometimes I hear Dad's voice in my head, giving advice I don't want but probably need. A bird landed on my father's headstone, looked at me with a tilted head, then flew away. I don't know if you're out there somewhere, watching. I don't know if there's a heaven or an afterlife, or if you're just gone. But if you are out there, I want you to know that I'm okay. I'm going to be okay. And I'm sorry I was late that night. But I'm not sorry I survived. It was the first time I'd said it out loud. The first time I'd been able to speak that truth without feeling like I was betraying them. I wasn't sorry I survived, because if I hadn't survived, there'd be no one left to remember them. No one to visit these graves. No one to cook Sunday dinners in their honor. No one to carry their stories forward, to keep them alive in memory even though they were dead in reality. I was the living proof that they had existed, that they had mattered, that 6 people had once sat around a table and shared meals and lives and love, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. It's been 7 years now. 7 years since I sat in traffic, cursing red lights, completely unaware that those delays were saving my life. 7 years since I walked into my parents' house and found 6 people I loved sitting at a table, forever frozen in their last meal. 7 years since I became the sole survivor of a family that no longer exists except in my memory. I'm 36 now. I have a life. Not the life I would have chosen. Not the life I imagined when I was younger and my family was alive and Sunday dinners were just a weekly obligation I sometimes resented, but a life nonetheless. I live in a small house in Pasadena now, not far from where I grew up. It has a garden where I grow roses, red ones, pink ones, yellow ones, my passionate ladies, my sweet girls, my sunshine babies. Miso is still here, now 10 years old, and even more independent than before. She's taken to sleeping on my bed, which I've decided is her way of showing affection without compromising her dignity. I'm still in therapy. Dr. Morrison retired last year, and I've been seeing Dr. Patel now, a younger woman who approaches grief differently. Less about closure, more about integration. You don't get over it, she tells me. You get through it, and then you get to decide what you do with what you've learned. What have I learned? That life is fragile and random and often unfair, that being late can save your life or ruin it depending on the day, that guilt and grief are 2 sides of the same coin, And you can spend forever trying to figure out which side is facing up. That Sunday dinners are sacred, even when you eat them alone. That survival isn't something to apologize for. I still cook for 7 every Sunday. I've never stopped. Some rituals are too important to abandon, too necessary to let go. But now sometimes I invite people over. Nathan, who remained a friend even after we stopped dating. Melissa and her husband. A few other friends I've accumulated over the years, people who know my story and don't run from it. We sit around my table, and I serve my mother's recipes, and we eat and talk and laugh. And for a few hours, the empty chairs don't feel quite so empty. The ghosts are still there. They're always there. I see my father in the way I organize my spice rack. I hear my mother in my voice when I'm cooking. I catch Marcus's sense of humor in my own sarcastic comments. I feel Emma's idealism when I donate to causes I believe in. They live in me, in my habits and my choices, in the way I move through the world. And maybe that's what survival means. Not forgetting them, not moving on, but carrying them forward. Being the vessel for their stories, the keeper of their memories, the proof that they once existed and mattered and were loved. I don't know if there's a happy ending to this story. I don't know if there's supposed to be. My entire family died at dinner 7 years ago. I was late and it saved my life. That's the fact. The immutable truth. The story I'll carry until I join them, wherever they are, whenever that time comes. But here's the other truth, the one I've learned slowly over years of grief and guilt and therapy and Sunday dinners with ghosts. Being saved doesn't mean being happy, but it doesn't mean being destroyed either. It just means being here, being alive, breathing in and out, planting roses, feeding a cat, cooking meals, making friends, building a life from the ashes of the one that burned down. Some days I still think I should have died with them. But most days I'm glad I didn't, because someone had to stay behind, someone had to remember, someone had to keep their stories alive. And it turns out that someone was me. I was late for dinner, and it saved my life. Not just the physical fact of survival, but the deeper salvation of choosing to live with the grief instead of drowning in it. Choosing to set the table every Sunday, even if some of the chairs stay empty. Choosing to cook the recipes, to tend the roses, to wear the watch, to carry the memories. Choosing to survive not just the death, but the guilt of survival. That's my story. It's not a happy one, but it's mine, and I'm still here to tell it.